Hello everyone, let's talk about the beloved passive voice. I'm going to show you what it is, what it looks like, how to make it, and why it's even used. And then at the end, I'm going to give you some little speaking tips for the passive voice. Here we go. All right, so before we jump into the passive, I think it's important to understand what the active voice is. Active voice, all it means is that the subject of a sentence, this is the subject, who or what a sentence is about, is doing the verb. That's it. And this is a verb. It's an action or a state. So Mary is the subject. Mary gave me a book. What did Mary do? Mary gave me a book. Subject, verb. In an active sentence, the subject does the action in the verb. Now, in the passive voice, it's a little bit different. Here we are. I was given a book by Mary. Same idea, right? Except for now, the subject of this sentence, I, is not the person doing the action in the verb. Okay? I was given. Did I do something? No, I just sat there and somebody gave me something. So this verb, the action actually happens to the subject in a passive voice sentence. This is the passive voice. Whereas in an active voice sentence, the subject is doing the verb. Subject does the verb. Here, the verb is done to the subject. That's really the main difference, okay? But we'll talk about why later. But first, let's talk about what's happening in the grammar. Okay. So as you can see, these two sentences are the same idea. Mary gave me a book. I was given a book by Mary. Okay. Here we have the verb give in the past tense. Here we have the verb give, but we also are using it in the past participle form with the be verb in front of it, a helping verb. So that's really important. The other thing is that right here at the end, I have this by phrase, by Mary, which is actually optional. You don't have to put it in there. It's extra information. You don't have to. I was given a book. Maybe you don't want to say who gave it to you. If you do, you can say, I was given a book by Mary, okay? But let's talk more about how to make the passive voice. All right, first thing you need to know is for the passive voice, you always need to have some form of the be verb, or you could also use get, okay? It's a little bit more informal, but very common. So some form of be, and then any verb in the past participle. Well, I shouldn't say any verb, and I'll talk about that later, okay? So be plus the past participle. For example, here's our sentence from earlier. Was given. That's the passive voice. And we have a form of be right here. A form. This happens to be simple past, third person singular. Given, past participle. If you're wondering what's the past participle, the past participle, I always tell my students, is that third form of the verb. We usually have the simple present, the simple past, and then the past participle when we're learning verbs. So you can say like, give, present or base form, gave, simple past, and given is the past participle. That is the third form of the verb. Every single verb in English has these three forms and more. And some are the same for the simple past and the past participle, but not all of them. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so in order to make a sentence in the passive voice, you first have to make sure that the sentence can be written in the active voice. Because if it cannot be written in the active voice, it probably can't be written in the passive voice. And that is because of the type of verb. Now let's check this out. Carlos writes books. Carlos is the subject. Writes is the action. It's the verb. And books, what's that? Well, that happens to be the object of this verb, okay? So I'm just gonna write object. Now, Carlos writes. So Carlos is doing the verb. That means this is an active sentence. What does Carlos write? He writes books. This is the object. Now, it's really, 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 important that there is a object after this verb. When a verb has an object after it, it is called a transitive verb. But don't worry, you don't need to know that. What it means is that this verb has an object after it, and it must have an object after it. Not all verbs have objects after them. For example, I sleep. Sentence is done. There's no object. An earthquake happened. No object. Okay? So some verbs don't have objects after those. You can never make a sentence passive if there's no object, because you need an object to make it passive. Now, let me show you what I mean. Carlos writes books. This is a transitive verb because it takes an object after it. Okay, now in order to make a sentence passive, all I gotta do is switch these things around. I'm going to move the object to the subject position. Books. And now I'm going to move this old subject to the object position, and I'm going to say, but what goes in the middle? Well, that's the part we just talked about. The verb. The verb has to go in the middle. Remember, what verb form do we need? We need a form of be plus the past participle. We need the past participle of write. What is the past participle of write? Write, wrote, written. Okay. And before that, we need a form of be. Now, what verb tense is that? That's the present tense. So what is the present tense of the verb be? Am, is, are. Which one agrees with books? Books am? No. Books is? No. Books are. Books are. So here's the be. Here's the past participle. This is the passive. We're not done. Now we have books are written. Carlos? No. Now we can add that by word. Books are written by Carlos. Now remember, you don't have to say by Carlos. It's not necessary. Sometimes you want to keep it, sometimes you don't. That's up to you. But look, now this sentence is in the passive voice because the subject of this sentence, this is now the subject, is not doing the writing. It is receiving the writing. The writing is being done to it. Okay? See the difference? Now let's talk more about when we can do that. All right, now check this out. All the active verb forms and tense combinations, all that were simple present, simple past, present progressive, present perfect progressive, past perfect progressive, modals, all that, right? You can write it in the active voice, but you can also put it in the passive voice as long as the verb has an object. So look at this. Carlos writes books. Present tense, let's make it passive. Books are written by Carlos. Present tense active voice, present tense passive voice. You could do it in the past. Carlos wrote books. Past. Books were written by Carlos. Now it's past tense. Wrote, were written. All right, let's go up a notch. Carlos is writing books. What's that? That's the present progressive or the present continuous. We have be plus present participle, ing form, right? Let's turn that into the passive. What do? Well, for the passive, we need be plus past participle. But if we want to keep it as a progressive form, we're also going to need a form of the progressive. Now, how are we going to do that? That means we need to combine the progressive verb and the passive together. And we're going to do it like this. Books are being written by Carlos. What in the... Okay, so that is, we have are being, okay, here, this is the present progressive, which is this up here, be plus a verb and ing. But here, these two together, now we have the passive, which is be, any form of be, happens to be ing form, that's fine. be, any form of be, plus the past participle. Books are being written by Carlos right now. Okay, what about this one? This is the past progressive. Carlos was writing be in the past plus verb ing. Let's make that passive. What are we gonna do? Same as the last one. Books were being written. Books were being written. We got be plus verb ing as the progressive, be plus past participle as the passive. Okay, take a look at this one. Carlos has written books. He has written books. What form is that? That's the present perfect, right? When we want to say something started in the past, continues till now, or happened in the past and is important now. Carlos has written books. What do we need to make the present perfect? We need a form of have plus the past participle. That's what you need to make the present perfect. That's what we have here. But to make it passive, we need to combine the present perfect with the passive. How are we going to do that? Books have been written. Books have been written by Carlos. We have here the present perfect, which is have plus past participle. And then here we have the passive voice, which is be plus past participle. We've combined them to create the present perfect passive, something like that. All right, same thing with the past perfect, which is very similar, except for it's past, had, not present. Carlos had written books. Over here, books had been written by Carlos. Future with will. Carlos will write books. We have will with the helping verb, the modal, whatever, right? We need that, but then we need be and a past participle. Books will be written by Carlos. How do I know that I need to use the be form? That's because will is a modal, and don't forget that every time you use a modal, the verb form after it must always be base form, just like up here. Will plus write, it's base form of any verb. Will, base form, will, base form. So because we need the be verb and the past participle, we have them both here after our word that shows time. Books will be written by Carlos tomorrow. Ooh, here's a great one. And actually, people don't actually use the future perfect that much. That's what this is, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. Carlos will have written books. Will plus have written. So future here. And then we have the present perfect. So it's called the future perfect. So we need to do that in the passive. And here we are. Books will, there's the future. Have been, there's the present perfect. Been written, there's the passive. Boom, 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 boom. Great thing is, to make passive voice negative is very easy. All you got to do is throw in the word not. You don't need to add another helping verb. Books are written is positive. Books are not written is negative. You put the not right after that first helping verb. Food will be eaten is affirmative or positive. Food will not be eaten is negative. That's it. You just put the not right after that first helping verb. What about for questions? The food is being eaten. Is it? Is the food being eaten? Here's an example of a question in the present progressive passive. Is the food being eaten? Let's find the subject first. Here's the subject, okay? And then we have a helping verb over here, and then the rest of the verb over here. Now it's passive. That means you do need to have a form of be and the past participle, which you have here. But what's this going on over here? This is part of the progressive. Remember, to make progressive, you need be plus verb ing. Here's that be plus verb ing. To show you what I'm talking about, When we want to make something in the progressive, we need be, a form of be, and a verb plus ing. To make something passive, we need a form of be plus the past participle. That's what's happening in this sentence. The food is being, that's the progressive part, being eaten. The food is being eaten. Is being is progressive, being eaten is the passive. Now, to change this statement into a question, I just need to move the verb, the first helping verb, which is this one, the first verb, before the subject. Is the food being eaten? Question mark. Is it being eaten? Now, the great thing to notice here about passive when you make it a question is that because be is part of the passive voice, the verb be, whenever you have the verb be and you want to make a question, right? When you move it to the front, you don't have to add or change it. You don't need a new helping verb like you do when you're making a sentence in the simple present without be. For example, I eat chips. This is simple present. Look at the verb. It's just active voice. There's no passive. There's no be verb. If I want to make this a question, I need to add a helping verb, which is really complicated. But to do it, it would look like this. Do I eat chips? In other words, I would have to add a new verb, do, to make a yes-no question, because my verb that I already have is not a be verb or a helping verb. So I need to add a helping verb. That's what I'm saying about the passive voice, is that the passive voice already has a helping verb. Be is a helping verb, so you don't have to add anything else. So making questions in the passive voice is a little bit easier than some other questions. Now, look at this sentence. Jose bought a bike. Let's make a question out of this. Let's see if we can make it in the active voice, a regular question. Look at the verb. Is that a helping verb? No, it's not. It's not a modal. It's not the be verb. It's not do. It's not have. We need to add a helping verb if we want to make a question. So we're going to say, and look, it's past tense. So are we going to use do or did or does? We're going to use did. Did Jose, and then here is our main verb. Now we need to make that in the base form because the tense is over here. We don't need verb tense on both verbs, only one. Did Jose buy a bike? Now that is active voice. It's just a regular question, but let's make it passive. Okay, so here's the sentence, not the question, the statement in the passive voice. A bike was bought by Jose, but we don't have to say that, right? A bike was bought. So now let's make that a passive voice question. Let's move the helping verb. It's already a helping verb. Let's move it on over to the front. Was, lowercase here, was a bike bought? Question mark. That's it. Okay, let's turn this one into the passive voice question. It already is in the passive voice. An essay has been written. The essay received that action, right? Now, let's make it a question. Well, where's the first helping verb? This is the first helping verb. There's two. 1, 2. This is the main verb. So you want to move the first helping verb over to the front, and you're going to say has, and then you need the subject, an essay, and now you just need the rest of the verb. Has an essay been written? So there you have it. That is how you make the passive voice. Now I'm going to talk about when we make it. But wait, before we do that, let's go over some common mistakes. Now remember, I said if you want to make a verb in the passive voice, it has to be a transitive verb, which means it has to have an object. First, let's look at these active voice sentences. A crime happened. Okay, does this verb have an object, some sort of thing that comes after it, a noun? Crime happened. No, it does not. So therefore, you cannot make it passive voice, and that is really hard. Let's see what would happen if you tried to do that. It would look like this. A crime was happened. This would have to be the subject, even though it can't be. And then the students would usually write was, and then keep this as past participle, but you can't do that. A crime was happened isn't possible because the verb happened doesn't have an object, so you can't do that. It can only be active voice. How about this one? She is sleeping now. Sleeping is the verb. Do you see an object after it? An object is a noun or a pronoun. Nope. That's just a time word. It's not a thing. It's not a noun. So you cannot make this passive voice. So what it might look like if you try to do that is you might write something like this, or is being slept, something like that. But it doesn't work. It's not grammatical because sleep is not a transitive verb. There's no object that comes after it. So the passive voice is actually pretty common. It's more common in academic writing, but you will hear people say, don't use the passive voice, but why? Let's talk about when it's used, okay? The first reason why you would want to use the passive voice is because you want to give a focus on that thing that comes at the beginning of the sentence. What I mean is that normally when we use the active voice, I can say, I eat nachos. I am the focus, I. But if I want to focus on nachos, I would move nachos to the front of my sentence. So I would say, nachos are eaten by me. And I would only do that if I wanted to give focus to that thing, okay? Here's an example of when you would want to do that. Here, what's happening in this sentence I'm going to show you is that I've mentioned nachos, but I want to bring cohesion and coherence between the first sentence and the second sentence by adding the word nacho at the beginning of my second sentence, which means it has to be in the passive voice because nachos can't do anything on their own, really. They're just eaten. Okay, so here's an example. People all over the world enjoy nachos. It's probably not true, but I love nachos. It's my favorite food. People all over the world enjoy nachos. A dish of chips and cheese, melted cheese. Here's my second sentence. Nachos are eaten, passive voice, often as snacks. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to bring more cohesion between this sentence and this sentence by using the passive voice, because that means that the word nachos, which I already said over here, comes first. If you don't want to repeat the word nacho, you could use a pronoun and say they. That's totally fine. The meaning is there. It's still coherent. They are eaten often as snacks. Now, here's what that would look like if I didn't use the passive voice. It would still be grammatical. It would still be great, but it loses that cohesion. Let's see. People all over the world enjoy nachos, a dish of chips and cheese. People eat them often as snacks. Do you see the difference? Here is an active sentence. People eat them, nachos, as snacks. Whereas I could have said, nachos are eaten often as snacks. It gives focus to what I'm trying to focus on. It brings focus to what I'm talking about and what I just said to bring cohesion. Another reason why you would want to use the passive voice is because you might want to avoid repeating the person who is doing something again and again and again. Look at this example. Teachers assign essays to students. Teachers grade the essays. I could say, teachers give the students a chance to rewrite their essays, or I can avoid repeating teacher, 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 and I can use the passive voice and say, students are given a chance by the teachers, but I don't have to repeat that because I can assume, and you can assume, it's the teachers who do that. So avoid that by using passive. Students are given a chance by teachers to rewrite their essays. Here I'm using the passive voice because I don't need to repeat teacher again. I know and you know it's teachers, so let's focus on the students and take out who's requiring or giving the chance to do something else. Now, this is the most important reason, I think, for why you want to use the passive voice, and that is because you might want to avoid and not say who did something because it's a secret, or because you don't want to put negative attention on that person. For example, Anna asked a rude question. I heard her. Did you? Right? Okay. But maybe he didn't, that person over there. So when I say, oh yeah, Anna asked a rude question, then the focus is on Anna. But maybe he doesn't need to know who did it. Maybe he just needs to know that it happened. So using the passive voice takes out the person who did it. Watch. Here. A rude question was asked. Now we're using the passive voice. We took out the name Anna. We don't know who asked the question. It doesn't matter. The fact is, a rude question was asked. And now we can avoid blaming that person because her name's not there. How about this one? Mike broke the rules. Mike broke the rules. Mike broke the rules. I'm blaming Mike. That's a bad thing, right? That's scary. Well, we can avoid blaming him by saying the rules were broken. Now I don't have to focus on who broke them. The focus is on the fact that they were broken, not who. We don't want to blame. And with the passive voice, you can take away the blame. And finally, the most important reason why you want to use the passive voice is if you're writing scientific reports or labs, which I think many people have to do, in college or something like that, where you're writing a science lab report. So with those, we want to be as objective as possible and not put ourselves or somebody else into it. We want to stay away from what's happening and be apart from it. And how do you do that? Use the passive voice because it takes out the person who does it. Look at these sentences. Researchers surveyed people. Who surveyed the people? Researchers. This is very active. The researchers did this, they did that. They analyzed the result. The researchers analyzed the results. It's very personal. Let's separate the researchers from these actions by putting them in the passive voice. Now, people were surveyed. By who? Researchers? It doesn't matter. We know that. What's important is that we're stepping away. The researchers are stepping away from this, and it's passive. People were surveyed. The results were analyzed by the researchers, but we don't need to say that because one, we know it's them, and two, because we're writing something more scientific and we want to step away from being part of it and be more objective. That means not have an opinion about what's happening and just let things happen. I know that's kind of confusing, but that is, so for science and reports and research and studies, oftentimes you will see the passive voice. I hope that was helpful for you. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.